had too much stuff in the elements.
Oh yeah.
And I think it was slowing it down, so I started cleaning that stuff up.
Gotcha.
So hopefully... Okay, we are live. Okay, I see it on my laptop. Yay. Okay. So, Sai, what are we talking? No.
You're gonna be editing that shit out, aren't you?
Oh my goodness.
You're literally the worst.
I like if we ever get a merch store up, that's gonna be one of the first shirts.
Hey, so dot dot dot.
With an it comes with an erasable marker.
I see shirts like that.
Yeah, yeah. They're great. Wait a second. What did? Oh yeah, did you do the Twitter thing?
I'm doing it right now.
I feel like we should have like some kind of background music. Cause it's like dead quiet, you know.
Yeah. I think this is
Just like almost like ambient something. What?
I don't know, I think it'd be potentially too distracting, but
Teddy Bear's Picnic? What?
Well, this got weird.
I wait, did I miss something? I'm very confused now. I'm very concerned. I just received an invitation to apply to the PayPal Cashback MasterCard.
Oh boy.
I'm so special.
You're a real boy now.
Yay. Oh my goodness. See, what I could do is I could get on 14 and start tanking some content.
And show how bad you are and like why your anxiety makes you a bad tank.
It's my anxiety, I swear.
Yeah. It's not you just being shit, it's your anxiety.
Yeah. I have a doctor's note.
Just imagine like a special badge. Sorry, this tank has anxiety. Could you be a little nicer?
like where
we have the doctor's note.
Like where the mentor's crown goes.
Right.
Like it's just like a piece of paper with some scribbles on it.
Like doctors know they're very anxious. Please be nice.
Like your online status is anxious. Like we're going like
I like the font you picked for the topic.
I mean I don't know, like I noticed there was a Google's fonts option. It is called Bungie. I don't know.
I think it looks nice. Because I was thinking something a little thicker, a little more weight to it.
Oh, from the one that I showed you before.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't.
Anyway.
I didn't like the one. I'll send you a snip of what it looks of the thing. Okay.
Right.
Wow, we already have 4 people in here. That was fast. It's like they're expecting us.
Right. You know, we're starting a little late, but you know, we're professional kids.
We are?
That's the theory.
Right.
Anyway, so we're going to be talking about Tankxiety, which is basically kind of the pressure people feel when they tank in MMOs. A lot of that kind of comes from basically the expectations we put on tanks, I think. Where in a lot of games the tank is kind of the default leader of the group. They kind of set the pace for the most part. And the tank is the person basically has to run in front because they're the one that should be grabbing aggro, running into monsters first and grabbing aggro and all that. So for a lot of people, this is kind of anxiety inducing because they kind of feel like, well, what if I don't do a good enough job, or what if I'm not good enough?
What if I do my pools wrong?
Right, right. What if I'm not going fast enough? What if I'm going too fast for the other people to keep up? That type of thing. And I like, as we were kind of talking about this, I kind of identified that this kind of fits into a larger discussion that we've had in the past for MMO development, talking about themes about solo versus group content.
Yeah, I think we've covered it before in the past. I think we talked about it in the. It was one of our verses topics. It was like
Right.
I don't remember. It was like a subcategory.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, like, my personal opinion as both a player and developers, I like there to be group content, but but the trend has been going toward more solo content for a long time, which I mean, there's kind of pros and cons to each kind of type of thing. Talking about the pros and cons of group content versus solo content. So I mean, a lot of it kind of comes down to for the player about their personal preferences. And I think there's some reasons why, in kind of the context of some of the other topics we've discussed in the past, why this is important, like why this matters. So
Yeah. Like I think one of the reasons why they're leaning more towards like single player content in MMOs is because they're trying to make that because MMOs have become unfavorable in the decline of World of Warcraft, that they're like, well, maybe we can provide other experiences within the MMO as well.
well, I think maybe kind of the interesting thing to do here would be to kind of go back a little bit at kind of the history of this type of thing,
Mm-hmm.
because like World of Warcraft was one of the first games to really have of the kind of the graphical MMOs to have that focus on solo. If you go back to text mods, especially the first text mods, they were mostly solo and competitive. There was very little way for people to really cooperate, and like there's even kind of the game kind of set up for them to be very competitive, where there was open PvP, what we used to call PK, player killing back in the day. And so like other players were kind of a danger, to be honest, because your character was a walking bag of experience, just like all the monsters around there. And especially in like the original mud and like a lot of the early muds, they had permadeath. Like if somebody came up and if you had like 10% of your hit points left after a fight, and somebody came on to you full strength, they would engage you in a fight, and like running away basically cost you experience points. So it was one way or another you were kind of losing out if you kind of met another player and they decided to go hostile towards you. I think like you could almost kind of compare it to like a lot of the modern games like Rust and whatnot, where maybe if you go in with some friends, maybe like the dynamic will be a little different, assuming your friends don't stab you in the back for shits and giggles, but like Malgrim would.
You're
Deny
right.
it. That's right.
I wouldn't stab you. I just handcuff you outside the door and
Right,
feed you to the
right,
wolves.
right. You wouldn't even get anything out of it. You would just be an asshole for the sake of it.
I
Um,
get entertainment.
you get that warm, fuzzy glow, fuzzy feeling. Yeah, and so like, and a lot of early MMOs kind of mirrored MUDs with kind of that focus, basic kind of focus on solo activity. Like Meridian 59 didn't have a party system. There was no way, like there was mechanics. So if you were beating up the same monster as someone else, you would like you could basically share some of the advancement potential.
Mm-hmm.
But like like a lot of the skills were advanced on use base, and so you know if hitting a monster took 20 hits alone and 10 hits with a group, you weren't advancing any faster. Actually, like you were kind of like a little less efficient because you had to go find the next you had to walk to the next monster in order to get those 20 those 20 swings of your weapon to get the 20 chances of advancing your weapon skill. It actually went slower. Um, Originally in the game, like we added something which kind of backfired in a way, which is kind of hilarious. But we added it so that monsters would spawn faster if there's multiple people in as a way to kind of encourage people to actually like be in the same zone with each other and not run away when somebody showed up, or for someone not to go, oh, guess they're like, oh, there's nobody here, so, or there's a person here, so they're camping all the good stuff, so I'm not gonna have a chance. But it kind of turned into a way where people adjusted their expectations so that the spawn rate with multiple people became the new norm, and they felt that if they were alone in the game, even though in theory it was basically like it was intended to be exactly the same spawn rate as the game originally had, they felt that was too slow, and so they like a lot of times people would log on alt characters, spawn mules they call them, to just stand around in a zone to basically increase spawn rate.
Oh my goodness.
Right, right. And so, like there was no way, like I said, like, there's no party system. So like, you were literally competing directly against people, for things. And like most people played it solo is when, like specifically played the PvE content solo. When it got to PvP, that's when the group stuff came in, and basically most people kind of, formed around the guild concept.
Hmm.
But the guilds really didn't have any gameplay effect. They were like the big thing for that was basically just being able to see friendly people on the map, after we added it, and then also having kind of a fairly secure chat channel where you know exactly who was listening and who wasn't. Um,
Spies.
oh yeah, oh my, spies were a big thing. Because yeah, like information was a weapon. If you could basically get the drop on people, that was basically that was a kind of a bigger thing for you. Um, and so yeah, and so like Ultima Online was very much the same way. Like, you had the like you had chat, like you couldn't even chat from with people at a distance. You basically, and they had like I think they were called guild stones, which is basically like, was a guild, but I don't think there was a whole lot that went on with that. It was basically like, the people in your area were kind of like, the people you could talk to, and it was basically the same thing, like where there's a lot of competition for, you know, who could, who's going to farm the monsters.
Oh, Ultima's free now?
Yeah, it's free to play. I think I don't know what the restriction is, but yeah, I mean, it's surprisingly enough, it's a very old game, and people aren't willing to pay subscription just to check it out. Um, but I think, but so looking back in history again, I think like EverQuest, the original EverQuest, kind of set the standard for group-based content, where most of the content was kind of is expected that you would be in a group, breaking up spawns and pulling monsters and and burning them down. And this was vaguely based on a Diku mud, as most people know by this point. And so like and I don't remember if that game had like they might have had party structure or something like that. I'm not entirely certain what the kind of the development lineage is for like a lot of the EverQuest systems.
I
Um,
don't know. I never got into EverQuest. I tried
right.
EverQuest 2 for like 3 days and then went,
E-
"Eeh."
Yeah, EverQuest. Yeah, we can get to EverQuest too in a bit. But yeah, but like one of the things that a lot of people talked about in EverQuest was kind of this concept of forced grouping. Like, oh, I have to go and find a group in order to go and camp the dungeon and break the spawn. And there was some exceptions to that. Like some people with certain classes could be, a druid was on the big ones. I think necromancer was the other one, where you could basically like run. You could run faster than an enemy, and you could basically put instacat dots on them, and so you would just basically kite. And I call it, this is where the original concept of kiting came from in MMOs. You would basically just kite a monster around, slowly doing damage to it with your damage over time spells, or your spells as they if you had any instant cast spells, the spells as they kind of came available. And it was it was slow but steady, and some people liked it because they were able to advance on their own. But for most people, like they have this kind of concept of forced grouping, like oh, I'm forced to be in this group, and it kind of chafes some people because sometimes you get in a really great, if you're in a really great group, everything's fine. But if you get in this terrible group, or someone keeps on AFKing, or the healer just can't keep up, or somebody doesn't have very good gear, or whatever, it can be very frustrating. And so, kind of with World of Warcraft, there's a shift back to the single player focus, where you had like the base game was was basically mostly about going to quest hubs, vacuuming up quests, going to do things that were basically fairly solo friendly, and then going back and turning it in. That was the main way you advanced your character. Where in EverQuest, you had to be part of a group. You had to go and camp spawns in order to advance your character. Um,
Yeah, WoW would have like the occasional like group quest,
right. But it
but
was like flagged as very obviously like this, and they had the grouped dungeons, but those were instanced, and so you basically had to kind of do a very specific party composition in order to go do the dungeons, and eventually they put in the party finder so that or the dungeon finder or whatever, to to allow you basically to kind of easily group up with other people. I still remember when if you had
looking for
four
group
people,
chat.
yeah, looking for group chat, or basically even just kind of standing someplace and waiting for other people to show up at the dungeon entrance.
And then they added
Um,
the summoning stones
right, the summoning stones, were kind of like a big thing. So yeah, then you could basically just kind of like grab, add people to the party and grab them and whatnot.
and the
But
warlocks.
right, and but yeah, like, but the group content was basically very separated from kind of the main content. Um, you could literally get up to max level, just doing quests, and and never, basically never having to do group content. A lot of people played that way, like and like the two major ways to play the game were basically either once you got to max level was either to start doing group content, which is dungeons and raids and all that stuff to to gear up to do the next dungeon or raid or whatever, or you basically went back and basically soloed up another alt. Those were kind of the two main paths to for entertainment
But
in World of Warcraft.
reputation grinding.
Oh God, don't even. I'm gonna hide under my desk now.
But
Um,
I gotta get my rep up with the Booty Bay.
but the other thing, kind of but talking about EverQuest 2 was kind of interesting was that EverQuest 2 was basically kind of supposed to be very EverQuest in its kind of behavior. Um, uh, but then but then World of Warcraft launch, had this great single player focus, and they basically kind of went back and kind of nudged EverQuest 2 along that path a little bit more to be a little more solo friendly. I don't know when you tried it out, but like if you tried it out very early in it, there was a lot more of a kind of a group focus to it.
Oh no,
Whereas if you tried out,
I sorry. Go ahead.
but if you tried it out later, then it was much more solo focused
I
because mostly because influence of WoW.
think it was like 2010,
Oh
2012.
yeah, okay,
Like
so
after
super late.
it was
Right.
after SOE did their whole free games
Mm,
market push.
right,
I think it was around the time Free Realms came out that I tried it EverQuest 2 out.
right, right,
And it was awful.
right. But yeah, so I mean, and like EverQuest 2, I don't think it was quite designed as well as World of Warcraft was for making kind of that single player journey up to max level happen. But like one of the things that a lot of kind of game developers talked about back in the day was that like before computers, games were essentially almost exclusively multiplayer. You look at checkers or chess or whatnot, like these games required another player. Um, uh, when computer games came along, it basically they kind of removed the need for the other player. You could play chess or checkers against the computer. You could play solitaire games. Solitaire games before the computer were kind of seen as like an aberration or something you did to pass the time. They weren't real games. And so basically, computer games kind of put that back, and then online multiplayer kind of brought it back to kind of the multiplayer aspect of it. When we look at a lot of the early games, and like especially like during when EverQuest was ascendant, a lot of games during that era, you know, basically there was a lot of focus on group activity, you know, PVE for EverQuest, but for PvP was kind of a group activity in Meridian 59 for a lot of times. And so, and one of the reasons why we can, why we look at this is, why it even matters is because, there's a lot of kind of consequences of this, like looking at group versus solo content. One of the first things that we look at is limited dev resources. What gets the focus? And this is kind of like a big discussion that everybody always talks about, especially kind of raiders versus raiders versus casual people. The casual people look at the dev resource poured into raiding, and they're like, well, why is this such a thing? Because people have kind of strong preferences for their own thing. People who are raiding want to raid, and people who just kind of want to grind up a character, a solo, want to grind up a character solo.
Bunny suits.
But and like kind of I mentioned before, like one of the things you're look at is the achiever focus means efficiency. Like how the drive towards catering to achievers means catering to efficiency. And a lot of times, one of the problems you run into is that other people are potentially inefficient. If you have a bad with you, or if you have somebody that's worse than you, like they're gonna they're potentially gonna slow you down
Worse
if you have to
than
rely
me.
on them. I know it's hard to think, but there are people who play the game worse than you.
Nah, challenge accepted.
I think the other thing that we gotta look at too is kind of a focus on more storytelling in modern games, and this is I've talked about this on my blog a bit, where we have kind of like two different stories in the game. You have the developer story and the player story. The developer story is basically like what we see and what you kind of experience through cutscenes in the game. And the player story is a lot more kind of a personal thing. It doesn't even mean like RPing or whatnot. It can just mean like, hey, then we did this dungeon, and then we wiped a couple times, but then we kind of figured out the strategy. Like that type of information, that kind of story, is not what we're talking about here. We're talking more about the cutscene type thing. A lot of times, the story, the most compelling story tends to be the one where your character is the big hero. I think that the two games that kind of come to mind immediately for me is Guild Wars 2 and Final Fantasy, where in both these games, like your character is playing this pivotal role in the story that happened. That basically is shaping the realm. Of course, you kind of have to squint and put on the blinders and ignore the fact that everybody else is going through that exact same story. Which is hilarious when you start getting to role playing in Final Fantasy 14.
It is. It's
Yeah,
fantastic.
right. It's like because in the story it's like you're the singular hero, and you go back and you're like, no, I'm just a schlub. I'm just a dude who does things.
And then you get that one person that is insistent on role playing that they're the canonical warrior of light.
Right.
You're just like, nah, no, you're not.
Right. But yeah, I think this kind of focus on storytelling and and having this kind of very deep and personal story that you're involved with kind of pushes it more toward a solo focus because telling group based stories is hard. We haven't done that. Like the only thing that I've ever been able to find that kind of relates to this is like oral traditions, and like where people kind of like they'll jump in and the closest we kind of have to that is like the kind of the Rocky Horror Picture Show, where it's less about interacting and more about the audience becomes part of the performance as well, besides just what's happening on the screen or stage or whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
um but like
Shared experience.
yeah, a shared experience exactly, but that's really hard to do. I mean, I think World of Warcraft did that a bit because like your character is more just kind of like a bystander in a lot of the kind of the grand things that go on. Which basically means the story is more consistent between different players, but also it also means that you know Sylvanas and all this stuff, they're off doing their things, and you're just kind of like in the background going, "Hi, mom," feeling more like an extra rather than a star. And so yeah, I think that you know,
Yeah, like I because you're talking about like your character and the story and whatnot.
mm,
The only game that I can think of that handled that well enough was like Final Fantasy 11, because
mm,
you had like your character, everyone's character was the crystal bearer, kind
mm,
of like 11's version of the Warrior of Light.
mm,
But outside of those very specific cutscenes, like the entire game was group based. Like yes,
right,
you'd have your character's cutscenes, but most of the time your character also wasn't the main focus of the story. They were more
mm,
of a viewing portal into the story, and the NPCs that you're interacting with would actually be like
right,
the main focus.
right. It's a
So
little bit more like the kind of the World of Warcraft, storytelling
mm,
system. So I think we were going to talk a little bit more about storytelling stuff a little bit later. So I know if we get to it, we have a lot of content to go through. But
yeah, we might
uh,
end up splitting this into multiple sessions,
right, right.
which is fine.
Um, so looking at group content, so like this is one again this guy like we're kind of giving you the background of why Tankxiety is a thing, what we're looking to do about this, why it's an issue. So looking at group content, and examples of group content are basically like dungeons, which are kind of like moderate in size and complexity. Um, then we have raids, which are slightly different, which are basically kind of more large and complex group content. Um, a lot of times in more modern games, raids tend to be kind of a little more simplified, but like a lot of older stuff like EverQuest 1, really where there was no instancing, everything's out in the open. Like raids were just like anybody who came could basically get a swing in on the monster, but usually there's some kind of agreement about who would get the drops and loot and whatnot. Um, but and then like early World of Warcraft, like essentially a raid was like a giant fucking dungeon where you were dragging 40 people through a dungeon rather than just five. And then you can also look at events for as group content, kind of gatherings and competitions. Some games have like game masters that'll kind of show up and do a little events.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of that's kind of very much group content. The GM's kind of trying to kind of entertain a large group of people. Another great example of kind of this event type thing is something called Weatherstock and Lotro, which is where people go to Weathertop in Lotro, which is basically a thing in the game, a place in the game where you can go and beat up wraiths, and people basically just play music all day because they had a music system where you could basically load up music files and play music. And so basically, it's basically like Woodstock on Weathertop. And so it was a big thing. I don't know if it's still a thing anymore. But it was a pretty big thing back in the day when I was playing Lotro.
I've never heard of
Uh,
that. That's fantastic.
yeah, no, it was on a different server than me, and so like I tried to run my I tried to make a level 1 character and run it over there with very poor results because it's kind of a mid-range zone. Um, and like obviously Weathertop's not a friendly if you remember
Obviously.
the books, yeah. The other big group content kind of looking at is role playing, where kind of the whole point of role playing is to kind of get people together and play out roles and whatnot. And I think this kind of shows that like group content isn't necessarily just what's defined in the game. Like dungeons and raids are basically game defined. Thou shalt bring a group in order to do these things. But things like events and role playing are more kind of spontaneous, more player driven, player organized. Usually and kind of show that like kind of that this is what makes MMOs different, because you can play a single player Lord of the Rings game, but you're not going to get Weatherstock in that single player, Lord of the Rings game. Maybe I don't know. Maybe you can go up there and crank some medieval tunes on YouTube or something like that, and hold up a lighter and you can do it yourself. But it's not quite the same as having a group of people with you.
We need to start that in 14.
Have a big music competition. I'm kind of surprised people haven't yet. The big problem though is, of course, is like Square Enix is much more frightened about copyright infringement,
They are.
and like because like when you get the ability to play music, it pops up a thing on the screen saying you will not play copyrighted music, right?
Well, to just to it says you will not record
Right.
copyrighted music. And that's
Fair.
just to protect them. It's just like we
Right.
are
Right.
not liable for blah blah
Right.
blah blah
Right.
blah.
Well, but I mean, yeah, it's. But yeah, I mean, like what they don't want is like you basically loading up a file of hit song, and then basically you know music industry lawyers sniffing around and going, hey, wait a minute. Um,
That
yeah,
does
and
not
so
stop anyone from doing it.
I mean, there's a lot of things that are technically against the rules that people do. But we won't go into that. We won't list people's sins here, because that's a little beyond
Let
the.
me pull up my Discord. Let's see here. We'll start with the A's. This.
Yeah. Um. Wow. Yeah, but and so like I think that yeah, but I mean like that, but that's like I said, that's kind of like part of the fun of an MMO is the fact that you do have other people around. You do get to potentially do really exciting and interesting things with the other people there, and generally, I mean again, sometimes it's not very smooth. So, especially like role playing. Sometimes you can find like two different groups that have like completely different, or even just like like you said, that one person that wants to play the canonical warrior of light when you just want to be kind of a dude that does crafting. It's like you know
You're basically describing my entire week in that one statement. So.
uh oh well, okay. Anyway, but yeah, and so looking at kind of the benefits of group content, like why is group content kind of like appealing to players and developers? um I think like first and foremost, it's something I've harped on a lot. If you read my blog, you kind of understand this. Is what we call the social fabric of the game. The social fabric is basically kind of like the way like all the kind of the relationships and friendships and contacts in the game kind of weave together. And basically like this is what makes a game very sticky. This is what kind of keeps you in the game. And from a developer point of view, especially if you're doing a subscription based business model, having people that are kind of like in the game is very important. Like one of the big things we heard a lot about EverQuest, when the game started getting a little old, is that people were like, well, I'm not really into the game anymore, but my friends are there. And so it's I mean, I guess it's kind of like the idea of like there's the corner bar that you kind of like, but then like a new manager takes over and it kind of gets a little run down, and things aren't maintained very well, and the quality of the drinks and food go down. And it's like, well, I don't really like this place anymore. But you know what? We've just been coming here for the past 5 years, so it's just kind of like tradition at this point.
No weekly poker game.
Right, right. Like it's one of those things that
Right.
it may not be your favorite thing anymore, but it's basically an excuse to kind of get together with other people. And from a developer point of view, hey, that's great. You're still paying us. And people, I mean, and people, may complain a bit about stuff, but like at the end, of the day, they're still getting something out of it. I think, and kind of related to that, like friendships are easier to form with repeated exposure, and group content means you're going to have repeated exposure to people. As you kind of as you meet the same people, like like I played EverQuest for like 3 months, I think. Like I exchanged like email addresses and stuff with people more freely back then than I do now. um, I'm a fairly social person, so but like I know a lot of people where like they met in EverQuest and they kind of formed this kind of core group of people that they kind of consider their online kind of cadre that they brought to other games, but they never were able to kind of recapture that feeling of just kind of like making a whole bunch of friends and becoming kind of the solid group quite the same. Um, I think the exception to this would be like what you've talked about a bit with role playing. Having kind of role playing groups and people that and then that have you know that have become kind of longer term friends.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like half the mods on my channel are from that group for me in WoW.
Right, right,
Like we've even though none of us play WoW anymore, none of us really. No, we all play 14 now, really.
right,
We've been able to keep in touch with each other for the most part.
right. And like a lot of times that kind of that by having that group content, you kind of get people together. I think another kind of big bonus of group content is people are able to help each other a lot easier.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going through a dungeon and you're just having like no luck with it, getting a couple friends to kind of help you, um, is kind of fun. Is a lot of fun. It's like really great. A really great feeling that they're like, oh, okay, yeah, because I know these people and I trust them more. We can kind of like they help me through this kind of difficult content. Whereas if you're playing a single player game, like you kind of beating your head against something, it's like your options are either to get good, find a cheat, or basically stop playing the game.
You mean me trying to play Mighty Number Nine?
You just need to get good.
I rage quit so hard on that game.
I think the game needs to get good. But anyway, um, and I think that
Ooh.
I think the other big thing too is like and this is kind of a little bit of a mixed bag. We'll get into kind of the dark side of this with the cons of it, but basically the community is better able to police each other in group content because if you need other people and you run into an asshole, if that person's kind of an asshole to multiple people, they can basically get ostracized out of the community.
Right.
And that's kind of one of the problems that I think World of Warcraft really ran into is that for a while it was kind of perceived as a very toxic game with toxic behavior because nobody really needed to be on anybody else's good side in order to do the content, you know. And this is where you kind of had the go 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 type attitude where other people were like I said like I said before, other people were inefficient NPCs that were kind of keeping you from achieving what you wanted to.
You mean there were trusts?
We'll get to that later. Um, but yeah, like so if you have these troublemakers, you've got people that are rude or whatnot. Like you can kind of like ostracize them. You can say no. You're a bad actor in this community, and we're going to put you on the outside, and that's going to hinder your ability to play the game.
Yeah, we had a few of those in Star Wars Galaxies that they ended up quitting the game
Right.
because they were known for scamming people in trades and
So they
stuff like
went to play
that.
Eve.
I don't know, Dijar. Have you met somebody by the name of?
Right. Swap notes to Dejara. Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing is that like you can also kind of set different community standards, for what's allowed and what's not. Whereas in Eve scamming's fine, whereas other games, scamming's not appropriate. Um, I think and another kind of big bonus for group content is along the lines of from a development point of view, is you can kind of like you're better able to manage challenging content. People can kind of get carried if you put something really hard in there. If you have if the game if it's possible for really good players to kind of like take really bad players under their wing and kind of help them through stuff. Which I
Yeah.
mean, I think like in Final Fantasy 14 happens in dungeons a lot.
Mm-hmm. And in my WoW rating days, in Wrath of the Lich King, it was widely acknowledged that the 25-man raid variants
Mm,
for like Icecrown Citadel um was like 100-fold easier than the 10-man version
mm,
because you just had so many more people. There was more wiggle room for errors to occur with the
right,
scaling that they went with.
right.
So we would have my guild, we would have our serious progression uh, uh, 10 man runs, for 3 days a week, and
Mm,
then we'd have our carry 25 man runs
mm,
during the week, on the other side of the week, and that
mm.
would be how we would get like our B teams up to par.
Right.
Um, so like
Mm.
in that scaling, the having more people able to go in made it easier, even though technically it's the same fight.
Right, right, right. No, exactly. And so, yeah. So basically, I just kind of have group content, but the thing is, yeah, again, kind of going back to the kind of the idea of single player game. If you run into something you just can't do, you either rage quit, get good, or find some cheat. Um,
You mean
and I
people
think
cheat in
like
Dark Souls?
uh, so I've heard. Um, but yeah, and so you have this. I think I think it's even if even though there's kind of negative connotations to getting carried, I still think that for me, if I need to kind of help with something, like it's a lot better to kind of like have that feeling of, oh, I help, friends help me, rather than like when I go to the web and input some cheat code in order to get some past something. It kind of makes me feel like I cheated the game a bit, and like and that usually like kills my interest in the game soon after. I think what game was it? Oh, Enter the Gungeon, which is like I love everything about the game
Mm-hmm.
except for like there's a major element of the game where it's like you have to do these very complex boss fights without getting hit even once,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm like, really?
Yeah,
Like
I got stuck on. I think it was like the second boss
right, right.
on that, and it's just like I could not get that timing down on one of the transitions, and I was just I stopped playing because I was just like I
Yeah,
can't do
yeah.
this.
Right, right. No, and I mean, like like I love the game. I love the art style, concept of it, and like dungeon exploration was pretty fun.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the bosses just kind of killed it for me. And like and at one point, I was just kind of like, I downloaded a trainer and basically kind of cheat my way past some of the stuff. But really, that kind of killed my interest in the game because I was like, okay, well, I see what I need to do, and I really have no interest in basically like pouring the amount of time the game is going to require to me to master this.
Mm.
Um, even assuming that like, hey, I have that level of reflexes
Yeah, I
that I'm.
I think you already bought it, but if you like Enter the Gungeon, try Moonlighter. It is.
Yeah, I got Moonlighter. Yeah, yeah, no, Moonlighter feels a little grindy to me, but and I guess that's like kind of another thing about pros for like group content is like if something feels grindy, it feels a lot less grindy when you have other people around. I think like my tolerance for grind is pretty low, but like Final Fantasy's been doing this thing where you can run specific content that they really want you to run for specific reasons, and you can get these irregular tomestones from a Moogle.
Which is just a currency, really.
Yeah, it's basically just a currency, and you get enough currency, and you can turn it in for rewards. Well, I kind of want some of the rewards, but like like we're talking about something where like you do like part of a 24-person raid for 2 tomestones, and it takes like 15-20 minutes.
Yeah. I
Depending
think
on the group.
25 minutes is like the
Yeah,
maximum with a good group.
right, right. And so like I just find that incredibly mind numbing to do that alone. But like if I get you or some of our other friends into even jumping on voice chat, like suddenly it makes that thing like 1,000 times better and more tolerable
Oh yeah.
because you can just do something else with it.
When I'm running content and I'm running it with friends, I almost have to be in voice chat with them so that I don't feel like I want to kill myself.
Mm,
Because I hate running dungeons. Dungeons are like one of my least favorite things in MMOs, to be honest.
yeah,
And like I'll run it solo, but if I'm running stuff solo, I am watching YouTube, I'm watching Twitch, I'm doing whatever I can to just numb myself to this other activity that I'm doing. If I'm with
right,
friends, we can talk and you know not have to focus on the content, but have a conversation.
right, right. But yeah, and and so I think that kind of one of the benefits is that for group content is players will have more control when you start looking at things like social content, like RP. You know, allowing players to kind of find people that they like hanging out with. To find the thing that they enjoy, finding a group they enjoy. I think it helps to make it a lot more enjoyable. Helps the game to feel a lot more enjoyable because and they don't have to kind of like you said, you don't have to be like, oh, I hate dungeons, and the game's gonna make me run dungeons. If you can find something like role play and find a good group and whatnot, then it basically puts a lot more control in players' hands, and so the enjoyment is more up to them rather than something necessarily that the developers did or didn't do.
You mean people do more than the ERP?
I've heard rumors.
I don't believe you. Like, prove it or it's not
Mm-hmm.
real. I'm gonna use the flat Earth fallacy.
What's interesting though, like kind of like you talking about like dungeons being your least favorite thing. Like dungeons, I think are my most favorite part of Final Fantasy 14. I'm a mentor, which is like you have to kind of jump through some hoops, and then you get a little crown next to your name, which in theory means you help other people. In practice, most people just want the little crown next
Does
to
this
their name.
crown make me look fat?
um, but like I like most of the dungeons, I can basically give like really brief explanations about how to do the boss fights, which kind of help people that haven't gone through the dungeon before. Um, but yeah, like like that's probably my favorite part of the game.
Yeah, I have mentor on my oldest character.
Mm.
And I used to really have fun like teaching people dungeons, unless it was Arm Vale, because that dungeon can burn in a fire. Uh, but Voidmo brought up running extremes
Right.
with friends, and they can be a lot of fun. I used like running extreme primals was the content that I would do and have fun with until I got back into role playing again. That used to
Right.
be the content that I love to do because it gave me just enough challenge, but then it became easily farmable once the challenge had passed.
Right.
And that was my enjoyable group content until the last like static quote unquote static group I was in kind of killed it for me. And that was in the middle of Heaven's Word. I never got back into primal farming again.
Yeah, like I've never been very like super fond of extremes. Like I mean, extreme is kind of like a little bit like baby raids because it's basically like the primal fights are what they call trials in the game are basically essentially boss fights, and so you generally have to go through kind of a normal or later they call them the hard version, even though there was no this basically the normal version. Um, and like very simple mechanics, and then there's the extreme version which had a lot more complex mechanics, a lot more or required a lot more organization and knowledge of mechanics in order to complete. um, and like like, like the extremes weren't bad, but like I was never really taken with them. Like, the most I do usually with extremes is like then the next expansion afterwards, then I'll go back and do stuff with smaller groups to get the drops that
Mm-hmm.
I want or the
Yeah,
rewards I want. Like because a lot of those have mounts, and so I got all my ponies in Heaven's Ward. I only really got birds from Heaven's Ward and Stormblood.
yeah. I'm
I
actually
haven't
working on my ponies on my current character right now.
right. And I have
Which
no interest in doing dogs yet until kind of the expansion.
I want my doggos.
I mean, like I collect minions and mounts, but like it's just like this is not the type of content that I really truly enjoy doing. So,
Okay, I did lie earlier. I did farm Susanoo and Lakshmi when Stormblood first
oh,
came out, but then I moved servers, and I was just like, I'm not doing that again.
right, right. So anyway, like so like obviously, we can talk about the great things. We're kind of starting to look at some of the cons of group content. I think one of the big problems you will look into is it's really hard for people with limited time to participate in group content because you essentially have kind of this social overhead of like dealing and organizing people. And like this was like especially poignant in EverQuest, where people would take a long time to find a group, But then when they found a group and if everything was working great, like they would just kind of like sit there for as long as possible because this is the most efficient thing they could do. If they left and tried to come back like the next day or whatnot, they would have to spend that time again to find that group and whatnot. So if you have like a limited time, having to do group content can be a real pain in the ass.
Yeah, and
Um,
11 in 11, like if you had to wait an hour to get a group, you wanted to be in that group for at least 3 hours.
right. Like and then like like 4 hour commitment to something is great when you're like a student or maybe single with with no significant other and definitely no family, but once you start dating or getting married or having kids or having to go to work to pay the mortgage, like 4 hours of time, uninterrupted time, what the fuck is that like?
Right.
And so like you're really kind of limiting your who can basically participate in it if if you're defining it that way. I think from the developer point of view you have to manage the community better,
Mm-hmm.
because you start like again you start getting kind of toxic people. They can basically kind of ruin the experience for people. Look at League of Legends kind of being the canonical example here, where you have to kind of play with other people and other people are kind of shitty.
Actually, on as a small tangent, I just saw an article that Riot Games is under investigation for
Yeah.
I forget by what department, but basically for toxic work environment and
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
sexist business
Yeah.
practices and
Yeah. No, that's been in the news for a while. Kind of like mirroring. The irony here, of course, is like like the in-game toxicity has been gotten a lot of attention. Not necessarily because they don't like toxic people, but because it's forcing away people that were would otherwise spend money. Um, and so yeah, and so and then you kind of have the dark side of what we talked about before, where the community can police itself and kind of force assholes out of the way. The problem is though, is that when you get enough asshole people, it can basically ostracize people that they simply don't like.
that's kind of like
Um,
the whole killers.
right. A classic example of this was uh, you could basically like or you could basically give thumbs up or thumbs down to someone in someone's place in The Sims Online.
Mm.
Um, And so, so the idea, of course, was like if the person was cool and they did good things, and you give a thumbs up. If they were if they were kind of assholes and abusive and whatnot, you give a thumbs down. Well, a bunch of people got together and they call themselves the Sims Mafia, and they go to people
Oh
and say, "You're
no.
going to pay us money, or we're all going to mark your spot down, and it's going to lose popularity, and no one will come here."
Oh my god.
Right. And so, yeah, like well then,
Oh my god, that's awful. I
right.
love it though.
I mean, you have to admire the audacity on some level, but on the flip side, is like that's not the type of people you want playing your game. So,
Right. Oh my
but yeah,
god.
but because like a lot of the stuff in The Sims Online was very much based on group, like if people were coming to your place and admiring your stuff, like that was a real threat. And so
They
like
should play Eve.
I mean,
They probably
I
do.
they probably do. Like that asshole PvPer probably plays Eve now. Um, and so and like another downside of group content from a developer point of view, kind of like what we talked about before, it's hard to do stories via cutscenes.
Right.
Um, I think a perfect example of this is like the main scenario quest roulette in Final Fantasy. So there was these two dungeons at the end of the Final Fantasy Realm Reborn, what players will call 2.0, the kind of the relaunch of the bad 1.0 launch. And there's kind of like these two dungeons. They're kind of the capstone of the whole thing. They were larger group dungeons than like the normal 4 people dungeons. Um, but they had a lot of cutscenes in them, and so basically what would happen originally was like there's one or two things you had to do. Either you watch the cutscenes while everybody else who already saw the cutscenes and didn't care rushed forward, and basically it went cutscene, get jumped up forward to a boss fight, cutscene, get jumped up forward to cutscene. Like you didn't actually get to play the dungeon,
And they're long cutscenes in this
and they
too.
were long. Like you said, like people would go from boss fight to boss fight in the time it took you to get the cutscenes.
If
Um,
that, like sometimes
right,
you could be two bosses behind and still be on the same cutscene.
right. And so, or the other option, of course, was to basically skip the cutscenes. Keep up with people. Actually enjoy the dungeon content, and then you basically go and watch the cutscenes later. So there's the Final Fantasy 14 solution to this was what's called MSQ Roulette, which basically means you're committed to run these dungeons, and the cutscenes are unskippable. But they give you a lot of experience points for this as compensation.
And
Okay.
it an example of like how bad it is that when they first introduced the roulette, it gave one set of rewards, and people complained that it wasn't worth it. It wasn't enough, and they actually upped the rewards on top of it.
Right. Right. Again, because of the achiever focus and efficiency, people were like, if I'm going to, because like, how long? It takes like 2 hours to get through the dungeon, watching the cutscenes and whatnot, right?
No, it's not. It's not 2 hours. It's like 40 minutes.
Is it 40 minutes?
Yeah,
Yeah.
because I do MSQ
Okay.
roulette.
Okay. It feels like 40 hours, but it feels like a full time job going through this thing. But
I just watch
um,
Flat Earth debates while I do it.
uh, that explains so much about you. But anyway, but yeah, because it's efficiency, you need to basically reward somebody for investing 40 minutes into this thing, whereas they could basically get through another dungeon in 25 minutes or whatnot. So
Like expert roulette dungeons take like exactly 15 minutes.
right, and that's kind of like the high end content you're doing with your your level 70 character to gear them up. Yeah. Um, the kind of one of the last kind of downside of group content is kind of dealing with the bads in content can just be frustrating when you kind of
Me.
have some. You said it anyway. But yeah, just it can be just like super frustrating to kind of have this person who's not paying attention, who's not doing the thing, that's not listening. Like this is not the ideal situation that you want to expose players to, and the players don't want to be part of that. So it can be just really frustrating to kind of like have to deal with that.
My favorite line is tank stands, please.
Yes.
What's
I
that?
mean, right, yeah, and yeah, and that one. The other interesting thing is like people kind of like doing that, like not even using people's character names, just like tank, do this,
Oh
you
yeah.
know, kind of this kind of removal of the personalization. Um, but yeah, and so that's kind of group content in a yeah. So now we can talk about solo content. We'll probably go through this a little faster because a lot of it is kind of like kind of the flip side of what we talked about. So solo content is things like leveling up a character, running quests, watching the storylines. But of course, like these things can also be group content if they're designed well. Some people like to run dungeons in order to level up because that's the most efficient thing. So leveling up a character can be group content. In Final Fantasy, like once you've kind of done the main scenario quest line is enough to kind of get one class up to max level. If you want to maximize other classes, then you have to look for other ways. Running dungeons tend to be so basically, if you're running, if you're leveling up one class in Final Fantasy 14, you can do it almost entirely solo, with the occasional acquired dungeon or trial or whatnot. But if you're leveling up other things, there's a lot more focus on group being group content. But so kind of some of the advantages of solo content is it's basically a lot easier to have control over. As an individual, you can kind of set your own pace. Much more efficient at achieving because you don't have that social overhead of coordinating with other people. Like I said, kind of like the flip side is easier to do story content via cutscenes. And you kind of get this feeling of like what we used to call alone together. And this was kind of like coined, like looking at non MMO content. You're able to do this. Like the example of this was bowling. Going to bowling alley. Like you might rent a lane and be bowling by yourself, but you're kind of surrounded by people, so you're not just like some recluse who doesn't want to deal with other people. Okay, MMOs kind of do the same thing. Solo content. Sure, you're just doing stuff by yourself, but hey, there's other people. You can maybe chat on a chat channel when you're feeling chatty and whatnot. You know, um, you can have the interactions at your own speed.
Until
Um,
you hit Rob on Savage mode, and then you wish everyone else would die in a fire.
then you kind of see the advantage of a type of thing. So a single player game of MMO. I think like the big thing, like kind of what we're talking about here is it avoids that Tankxiety issue where like kind of that pressure about how to how to do content with other people. If you're doing it alone, then the only person you're going to disappoint is yourself, which happens kind of frequently for some people. But
Hey, I told you not to talk about that.
look, you've already brought up that you're a bad, so all fair game at this point. And so the downside of hill content, basically, kind of pretty obvious. It's a lonely experience if you're not having other characters around to, if you're not having other people around to basically kind of like to chat with and whatnot. Again, and kind of like a lot of it's like from a player point of view is why are you paying a subscription? What's essentially a single player game?
Yeah.
Um,
Um, one of my one of the things that comes up to me a lot when I'm playing like a lot of recent single player games is
mm,
that they'll try to do the same like dress up content that like MMOs do, like Final Fashion 14 on
right.
fashion frames. Like single player games will try to do it, and I have like no interest in it whatsoever because there's there's no one else there to share it with. So why should I invest in doing this fashion stuff in the single player game?
Right. I mean, and yeah, I mean, there are some people that like kind of like doing stuff, expression stuff for their own sake. Like, there's people in Final Fantasy that will doll up their characters and then take screenshots and share them. Like, there's a ton of Instagram accounts doing that, just that. So, I mean, you could theoretically do the same thing in a single player game, but yeah, I mean, it feels a lot less meaningful, and like, that interest is kind of like a very kind of small slice of things, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but also you're looking at things like if you're mostly solo, you're gonna be kind of beating your head against difficult content, or you have to have some kind of like weird mechanic explaining it. Like in Final Fantasy 14, they have this thing. It's a storyline thing called the Echo, but like if you fail a single player instance enough times, they will give you this Echo. It's like you're gonna do a little more damage, you're gonna take a little less damage, you're gonna heal a little bit more. Um, and it feels like a little bit of an artificial kind of like yeah, sorry about that, maybe that was a little hard.
It's a bit of a handicap.
Right. But like, what's interesting is like when it's not instance though, like it's really kind of jarring. So like in the most recent expansion, there was a place, an unlock for the kind of the storyline group raids, which are fairly casual. um they're raids in that they have a lot of people and they're very complex, but they're still a fairly casual thing. They're nowhere near as kind of hard as like the savages and extremes and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but there was these two red chocobos you had to fight,
Oh my
and
god.
yes, every Final Fantasy 14 player right now just cringed at no at that mention, because like it was these two chocobos that were out in the open world, and they would cast this very fast cast
Meteor. They throw meteor
meteor.
at you.
Right. Which not only did a ton of damage, but also put a damage debuff on you, so that you took more damage the next time you got hit with it. And like it was basically if you were playing any sort of character that had to stay still in order to do damage, like you got your lunch eaten.
Yeah, I recently had to fight those on Fina,
Right.
and
And
I figured out to kite them around and learn their cast pattern.
right. I mean, like it's possible. I'm sure people did it, but like for the most part, the easiest way to do it is you basically call over someone, a friendly someone, to basically like occupy one or heal you or do something in order to take some of
Mm.
the load off of it. or someone else to damage the things while they were chasing you around, whatever. Um, but like having another person there basically just made this so much easier. And you kind of kind of touch time about that. One of the problems with solo content is it's really jarring when you basically the game kind of requires group content all of a sudden. Um, something I want to talk about a little bit later is I played Lord of the Rings Online with my significant other at the time. We had these two characters that were perfect together. We could do a lot of group content with just the two of us. We were so well, we were put together so well. But they had kind of a main scenario quest type thing where sometimes they would throw you into a solo instant.
Mm-hmm.
And my significant other was very tanky and could do a little of everything, but didn't do a whole lot of damage. My character was a lot less tanky, but still kind of tanky, but could do a whole lot of damage. And so when we got thrown into an instance, like my significant other would kind of get bored because she was kind of not killing things fast enough. I would get frustrated because I would die a couple times, but we would kind of end about the same time generally, and it was kind of a just terrible experience for us because we had built these characters to be group characters in a single player game, and even like I said, we can even do group content, but when we were forced apart, when we were forced to solo, it was just a lot less fun experience. um the other thing, of course, is kind of what we're talking about with the single player games. When you're done with content, there's a little else to do. You've got nobody to show things off to. You got nobody to demonstrate. Another big thing is demonstrating your mastery of something. Your the that's the big thing for achievers, is basically to master something and be able to show proof of that mastery, whether it's items or titles or whatnot. And so these pretty items, you could just kind of get ignored in single player games for the most part.
Yeah, bragging rights, and welcome to the stream.
But so that's kind of so there's a background. I mean, what, we took about an hour for that.
um, an hour and 6 minutes. Yeah.
Right. So that's kind of the background, talking about kind of group versus solo content. So now we can kind of talk a little bit about this concept of Tankxiety, which is arguably the topic, the thesis of this. Um, Kind of like I said, Tankxiety I think a lot of Tankxiety comes from the what I was talking about, kind of this jarring change between what the game requires. When the game kind of requires group content, when it's kind of normally a solo game. And so you have people who may like the play style of a tank type character in open world content, but then are a little bit less than thrilled with it when they have to kind of do this type of thing in a group setting.
Yeah, it's like that when I went back to play WoW. I fell
Right,
in love with Tank Demon Hunter, but playing it in groups, I was just like, meh.
right. And so in a lot of games, kind of the tank is basically kind of the anchor of the. Like I said, the kind of the beginning, they tend to set the pace. They're the ones that have to kind of be out in front, so they can basically pull monsters before other people pull monsters. Um, and this kind of so there's a bit of reliance and even a bit of an expectation of leadership, and this can be a super stressful thing for people. Who really kind of don't want it. I mean, they may like the tank gameplay and whatnot, but it's I think a lot of the anxiety comes from this idea of them have to be the leader to set the pace to kind of control things.
They have to be.
Um,
They have to basically be aware of everything that's happening.
right, because if your healer is basically low on mana and you pull, well, you should not have run off and pull. You should have waited for the healer to get more mana back.
And they
You
have to
know,
pay attention to the aggro of the DPS to make sure if the DPS are attacking something that they're not focusing on, then they have to make sure to snap that aggro.
right. And so there's just a lot of and a really bad tank may basically kind of hinder the whole group. Whereas a bad DPS, well, things die slower, but that may not have its noticeable effect as, oh, I can't keep aggro, or oh, I don't know how to use my cooldown, so I take too much damage for the healer to heal or whatnot. And so they also then if you die, then the monsters go and rampage on the rest of the group, and you know that kind of like reflects poorly on you. Um, yeah, and so and you also have to kind of deal with like other people who may not have the same group goals as you. Um, like one of the things that one of the things that always kind of frustrates every tank is basically when other people kind of pull, basically them saying you suck at your job of controlling the pace. I think we should go faster. And
Mm-hmm.
so it just kind of adds to the stress and anxiety that now all of a sudden you have to not only do all the things that you have to do you normally have to do with a tank, but now you're handicapped because now you have to fight with aggro with someone else. um and that that can just be like that just kind of adds to frustration. I think another big thing is like no fallback, because there's only one tank per group for the majority of content, even like even in larger group content. um the full party stuff. Like there's a the party sizes are 4 in Final Fantasy 14, and it can go up to 8 for full party stuff. But like for full party stuff for the 8 people, they'll add another healer and more DPS, but you usually only have the one tank still.
That's for the 24-man dungeons.
Yeah,
You'll
yeah,
have one tank per group, and then you have 3 groups. But for like
right.
the primals, you have 2 tanks.
Yeah, but I mean, yeah, but like but still, like like a lot of times, especially when you start getting into the harder content too, it's like like you're either main tank or off tank, and you have very specific things you have to do. Like but like for a healer, like if somebody, if or even DPS, if somebody's kind of slacking off, other people can pick up the slack easier than if the main tank is doing something, and the off tank kind of the off tank's already doing off tank stuff, and not necessarily able to kind of step in and and help the main tank, kind of like a healer can help each other. And so like I think that kind of gives a lot more kind of anxiety.
Because
um,
there's no fallback, basically.
right, yeah, because like and like the 24-man stuff, like you said, there's 3 tanks in the whole group, but generally each tank has to do their own thing. you know like for a lot of the bosses, like one will be the main tank, the other will be kind of off tanks. But like for a lot of the other stuff, or even like even for some stages during the boss fight, you as a tank have to go off and tank this one thing so that your party's not getting splattered. And so now you have to kind of juggle this. Okay, well, I'm doing damage now as the off tank, and now, oh shit, now we have this transition. I have to pay attention, and if I'm not Johnny on the spot, then everybody else, then my group suffers, and there's nobody else to basically can potentially step in and go, oh, don't worry, I got this instead.
Yeah. And, speaking as a healer main for now,
Hmm.
I'll always be a healer main, but like running a, let's say, the 24-man raids,
Hmm.
for example. If one of the DPS dies, I'm like, okay, get your ass back up. If one of the tanks if my co-healer dies, I go, oh fuck. If
Right,
the
right,
tank dies, I go, oh, double fuck.
right, right. Well, that sucks.
Like, panic
Right,
mode
right.
engaged.
Right. And so like you just have all this whole pressure on certain roles. Like I think you get some of that with healer, but like I think it's a little bit less because like when you have 2 healers in the group, one healer can kind of pick up for the other one a lot easier. And even things like reses, like like we have a couple of classes that can do combat reses now, so because that can basically kind of take some of the pressure off the healer. But like there is no class that can basically go and tank something for for any significant amount of time
No, they
to
took
kind
it
of pick up
away. It
for.
used to be Ninja.
Right, well, I mean Black Mage tank is best tank, but one
Mana
time
wall.
on one time on Alexander 12, um I tanked the last 30 seconds of it as a Black Mage because the tanks died.
Nice.
Yeah, and they basically, and then like it was just a sliver of health left. So most of the healers basically just started pouring heals into me. I threw up mana wall and basically, we went. It was a glorious 30 seconds for my character, but
uh, in a
it's
realm
not something you can rely on.
in a realm reborn, I had a similar experience. We were doing Titan Extreme, and this is how I
Mm,
met Mick. I've talked
mm,
about Mick before.
yeah.
I mean, we're in the same guild, but I was new to the guild, and the entire group wiped on Titan Extreme except for me and Mick, and I was on Scholar, I think, and we got to Super Bomb phase,
Mm,
and we couldn't gain on any of the bombs. It was just two of us, and we're just like, no, we refuse to die. So I was on my Scholar, so I suck cord, I add Liquid myself. Put up all the shields and Fey defense,
mm.
and then he apostasised me, and I managed to survive Super Bomb with like 10 health. And it was just
Nice.
like, okay, I'm good. And then we both jumped off the platform
Right.
and reset.
Nice.
But and then we became friends.
That's good. Yeah. I mean, again, that kind of goes back to kind of the bonus of group content. It's like, yeah, you kind of have that. You kind of
And
have that.
personal
That
storytelling there.
right, right. But that's something that you only get with group content like that.
Hmm.
The jar kind of makes an interesting comment. The tank is a leadership choke point. Somebody else can lead, but the tank has to agree. And I think like the problem with that though is that like if the tank is not the leader, like then you get that inefficiency I was talking about, where somebody else makes a decision, has to confer with the tank has to agree, and then you go along with that. When you have that achiever focus in games, that's when you kind of really have to focus on that aspect. Um,
And when you have a
yeah,
hesitant tank, that is
right.
extremely frustrating for a healer, for example.
Right, right. Well, I mean,
Because
you kind of have, that's where you kind of get different. It's like, kind of the go, 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 era of World of Warcraft, tanking where, or, mentality because people want to get through the dungeon as fast as possible because they want, the experience from it. Um, there's no time for learning, no time for hesitation, in these people's minds. And that kind of like builds, that can potentially build up a lot of anxiety. Because like one of my another MMO developer, a guy Jonathan Barron, who basically wrote some great articles. But he has this example he basically talked about early in my career, talking about MMOs. Kind of stuck with me. It's like MMOs. You can imagine like trying to learn to play football as a novice, and you're on a professional team surrounded by fans, a stadium full of fans of professional football. Like, this is basically like this is what causes anxiety, being where you're this novice trying to learn, and everybody else feels like an expert. And all of a sudden, you're the person fucking up, you're the person holding back, you're the person that is doing everything wrong. And especially when you start getting people that just aren't as generous and considerate, it can just feel really really stressful and frustrating.
oh yeah, the whole basis of Tankxiety is the fear of disappointing your group.
I'd say that it's less disappointing than basically just more letting them down, like not
Yeah,
make
sorry, yeah,
like
I was using disappointment as synonymous with letting down,
right,
but
right. Well, I
that's
think
what I
that
meant.
it's slightly different. I mean, you disappoint me, but you don't often let me down.
Don't worry, I disappoint myself. It's fine.
Yeah, it's fine. I know how your parents feel. Oh, you probably let them down too, don't you?
Hey, you promised you wouldn't talk about that on this.
Oh yeah. Well, just like your parents, I lied to you too.
Oh my goodness. I'm gonna have to actually edit this video now.
No.
I just had a sad.
Take out the crying. Um. Yeah.
I'm getting Discord messages now.
Oh. Getting comfort. um. So
Anyways, we were doing this podcast.
right, right. Oh yeah. Back on track. So basically, I think kind of another. Why don't we talk about the trust system in Final Fantasy 14? Because I think this is kind of a really interesting thing where I think this is kind of a really interesting thing that they're introducing with the next expansion. That has a lot of history here because we're looking at what um, we're looking at basically like what other what games have done with kind of solo versus group content, and like this basically is they had something called the trust system in Final Fantasy 11. They're introducing this in Final Fantasy 14. There's some kind of differences, although I think the kind of the design goals have been similar. Um, Malgrim is going to be our expert today about this because since he's played Final Fantasy 14, 11, and 14.
I feel
Um,
so honored.
Right, right. And so yeah, and watched the live letter, which I don't watch for Final Fantasy 14. So knows a little bit more about this. So
Yeah. So in 11, when the player bases started to dwindle down, or when they anticipated for the player bases to dwindle down, they introduced an NPC system, an NPC party system. That, I mean, basically, it's reminiscent of any Final Fantasy game in principle, where you have your main player character, and then you have all a bunch of other characters that follow them around and help you fight stuff. I never played Guild Wars 1, so I don't know.
I know a little bit about the system on Guild Wars 1, and it's probably similar because yeah, you could basically get basically NPC helpers that would help you do group content.
Okay.
So but Guild Wars 1 I think it was a little more instanced than Final Fantasy 11, so
Yeah.
worked a little differently, but yeah.
So the way it would work is you'd go through the game story, which, like, the story for the most part was optional. Like, you could level up without really touching the story unless you needed to get to a specific zone that was gated behind a particular quest or whatever. But as the player base started to dwindle, they introduced a system so that people could get classes leveled up without having to rely on players. And they tried several different implementations of this. At one point, they had it so that you could summon a companion with an item, and then you could like gear out the companion with different classes and whatnot, and that kind of worked out, but not a lot of people really jumped on it. So then they did the trust system where you could get a full party of story NPCs to follow you around. And it worked out really, really well, but they were always less efficient than a player would be because each NPC would only have a set amount of abilities that they could use. So part of the almost like collectathon aspect of getting trust is trying to get the best trust for what they do. Like you could have like there are like three or four different red mage trusts, for example. Well, only one of them actually used the explicit red mage spell refresh to give MP regeneration to the party. So, but they were that was the hardest red mage to get. So you were encouraged to go after that harder content to get that character. The the difference from so
And like you said, though, like there's a huge collectible aspect of it where you had to
right.
kind of go out and find these things, add them to a collection, and then you kind of pick and choose. It's like, okay, I want this trust and this trust and this trust and this trust with me to go do this content.
Right. And
Right.
like you could even get different variants of the same character as well.
Mm.
Which might have a slightly different class or might have slightly different weapon skills or spells, or even just AI behavior in general.
Mm.
But the one of the big important things is that each trust had its own AI behavior personality. So no two trusts would handle the same situation the same way twice, the in the same manner. So that made some of it kind of interesting to do certain things with different trusts just to see what would happen,
Mm.
or do certain fights as in with certain trusts, because like some mobs would actually have a particular weakness to a particular to a to the to a particular trust, so it would be beneficial for you to bring them even if they didn't necessarily complement your party
Mm.
in the best way possible. Or if I remember correctly, I think that was a
Right.
thing for a couple of the fights. Um, and so Final Fantasy 14 is introducing a version of the trust system, but the difference is that you won't be, according to what they've talked about in like the live letter and in interviews recently, is that you won't be able to summon trust in the overworld, which is a huge difference from Final Fantasy 11, and it's gonna be much more limited. Like I think there's only 5 trusts in Shadow that will be released in Shadowbringers, 5 or 6 maybe, and
And,
hmm?
and you'll get those through MSQ. I remember you saying.
Yeah, you get them through the Shadowbringers MSQ. So at certain points of the MSQ, certain trusts will be available while certain ones won't be. Um, because they were talking about in the video that I was watching, they were showing off the trust system in the live letter, and you only had 5 of the trusts available, and they're like, oh yeah, Y'shtola would be here, but we're not at that point in the MSQ, so that slot is obviously empty.
Mm.
Um, so it sounds like over the course of the MSQ, you'll have certain characters available at certain points of time, and certain characters won't be available at certain points of time. And then probably at the end, you get everyone all together at once.
Right.
And so the way trusts work in 14 is that they are an alternative way to run dungeons, uh, compared to running with players. And there's like some benefits and some not benefits. I can't think the word.
Advantages, disadvantages.
Disadvantages. Wow, yeah, that's the word I was
Mm.
looking for. So like an advantage to running the trust is that they are heavily scripted NPCs inside the dungeons. I was actually thinking about it, Sai,
Uh-huh.
and the NPCs inside the Alamiga expert, the Grim whatever it's
Oh,
called.
Gimlet Dark.
Yeah. Like
Do you think that?
there's a bunch of heavily scripted NPCs in that dungeon. I'm wondering if that was an experiment to test
Yeah, a little
out.
proof of concept.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. That makes sense. Because that's one of the most recent dungeons too. So yeah.
Yeah, I just ran it today and I'm just like, "Oh shit, are these trusts?"
Yeah, and there's a little bit of variation too because I know at least the one part I've noticed is at the end, you have that basically that the robot that basically is going to self destruct,
Yeah, yeah.
but there's no way you can do it. it, it's not always the same NPC that kills it. It's
Mhm.
either Yugiri or
Hian.
yeah, Hien. And they say different things. They do a different attack and whatnot.
Yeah,
So
I think that was their proof of concept for the system,
yeah. I
which is
noticed
neat.
that. I never put that together, but yeah, I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I noticed that 14 tends to do that a lot. Like when they're playing with a new system, they'll do a proof of concept in some content release and go, "Oh yeah, that works. Okay, we'll push it further."
Right.
But anyways, I wish I had some footage for that fight to explain it. I should have thought of that beforehand.
Yeah.
But it just struck me today that that was a thing.
I don't know.
Anyways,
That's a good point. But anyway, so what you're saying is basically like the trusts are going to feel a bit like that. You're going to have these NPCs with you. They're going to basically be spewing out storylines, script lines. They're going to be doing specific behaviors and activities.
hmm
Probably get a little bit of like what you talked about, where like certain people. Are you going to be able to pick who goes with you, or is it going to be
Yes.
like you? Okay, so there might be a little bit of that, like oh, if you bring your stroller along this one, then it's going to have this other additional content.
Yeah.
She's
So
going to have this other interaction or something like that.
yeah. So depending on who you bring with you and what composition you bring with you will alter what kind of interpersonal conversations they have with each other throughout the dungeon, which is really
Mm.
interesting. And it will also change how certain boss mechanics are handled.
Mm-hmm.
Like one footage that they kept showing in the live letter, they kept showing in the media tour, was the final boss of one of the dungeons. At one point, he drops the floor out, and there's like this small like glass bridge that you have to cross to get from one end of the arena to the other,
Mm.
and like the player is expected to just very carefully
Right.
run around this bridge because it's a little bit of a zigzag. And what they were showing with that was that, say, Thancred, for that fight, he's supposed to be the Gunbreaker tank.
Mm.
He'll start running across the bridge, almost slip halfway across, say "fuck this," and he'll just leap across. He'll just use his gap closer to get the rest of the way instead of running the rest of the way. Instead of running
Mm.
across the second half of the bridge, he'll just gap close to the boss.
Right.
And Alice will just gun ho across the whole thing, just be like whatever. But Minfilia and Alphinaud, they will apparently those characters are afraid of heights, and they
Mm.
will literally like hold their arms out and tiptoe across the bridge, and more than likely the mechanic will be complete before they get across, and the floor will just come back, and then they'll just resume because it's like a DPS check.
Mm.
And they also showed like Ar Oriange. He'll just forego the entire mechanic, wait for someone to get across, and then ethereal manipulation to them.
Nice.
Just be like, whatever.
Right. Right.
Like, so that shows like it gives these characters a chance to show some actual personality and some
Right.
quirk,
Right.
and makes it a much more believable experience, I guess would be a word. It's not about efficiency, it's about the experience.
Right. Right. It's kind of going back to what we were talking about. Like they're telling a story here through essentially like not necessarily a cutscene, but through through a scene that is not entirely focused on being as efficient as fast as possible. And this is going to be something that would be harder to do with other players because the other player would be like running off ahead or potentially or whatever. It's easier to kind of like force one person to watch a cutscene, in order to kind of experience the type of thing of like going across the narrow bridge versus when you have multiple people. It's like, well, it just feels like you're just kind of holding everything up. But yeah, and and so like you said your feeling of this is basically it's kind of like a little bit more of a single player experience, a little bit more kind of like of a typical Final Fantasy story experience in the games. Yeah, like because you played a lot of Final Fantasy 15, and so it
Yeah.
felt a little bit like that. You were thinking,
Yeah, like as I was watching the footage, it very much reminded me of the interactions and the behaviorisms of your Final Fantasy 15 party, where I remember one particular fight in 15. Like one of your guys just gets freaked out and just like goes and hides in a corner until
mm,
one of your buddies runs over, pats him on the back, goes, "Come on, we can do this." And they're like, "Okay, I believe you." And then they go like limit break or something.
mm,
And it very much reminded me of Final Fantasy 15 in that sense. And I think that's where they kind of got the idea for it, to be honest.
mm,
Um,
mm,
and one of the other things that they talked about that I thought was really interesting and kind of a cool thing for them uh, uh, to think about doing is limit breaks. Um,
right,
where they were saying like Alice A, she's a Spitfire, like she gives no fucks. As soon
Right.
as that limit break gauge, because you can get limit break 1 with trusts.
Mm.
As soon as that limit break gauge fills out, Alice A's gonna fire it off. She gives no fucks.
Right. Right.
But if you have like Minfilia with you and you're a DPS, she's gonna wait for you to do it. If you take too long, eventually she'll do it. But she's
Right. Right.
she's gonna hold off and let you have your moment. If you're a
Right.
tank
Right.
or a healer, then she'll handle it because well, there's no who's gonna waste an LB for a tank or a healer? Yourself.
Right. 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 Right.
So like that helps shows their personalities. Where Minfilia is a little more patient, and Alice just wants to kill stuff.
Right. Right. She's the go 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 type of DPS, huh?
Yeah, yeah. I think like they're kind of making a comment about players through the
Right.
trusts too,
Right. Right. Right.
which I thought was kind of funny and very meta for them to think about.
Yeah, because like the limit break is kind of like it's generally kind of reserved for the DPS to do big damage, but sometimes people use it at less optimal times.
And
Like
everyone gets mad at them.
right, right. Because generally you want the melee DPS to use it because it does like large single target damage, so you want to save it for the end boss. Knock off the some health of the boss and get through the fight a little faster. Um, Range DPS can also use it, but basically it's more of an AoE thing when they do it, and so it's going to do less damage to a single target. And so if you have like a melee DPS and a range DPS, and the range DPS blows the limit break,
Everyone
it's really
groans.
right. Everybody's like, "Why'd you do that? Now we have to spend an extra 15 seconds on this boss. How dare you?"
How dare you waste my time?
Well, I'm sitting here killing time playing a game.
uh,
Yeah, yeah.
my favorite thing though with limit breaks, since we're on the topic, is
Right, right.
because spellcasters get an even bigger AOE limit break than
Mm,
range DPS do. Because there's a
right,
difference between a caster and a range DPS. I know it's silly. Uh,
right,
one strategy is if you have a dungeon that has one really big pool room, is to pull everything and then have a spellcaster LB or limit
right,
break, and it helps kill everything faster. It takes like a third of their health.
right.
But sometimes when I'll do that, I'll get yelled at because they're like, "Oh, save it for save it for the boss." Yeah, I'm like, this takes 3 times longer than the boss does.
Right, right, right. Like you're basically kind of like cutting down the yeah. It's basically and sometimes depending on when you do that limit. Sometimes you can build up the limit break gauge again to basically to at the boss in order to get like basically you're saving a little time. You're only gonna get the level 1 instead of potentially the level 2, but yeah, you're saving a little bit of time
Mm-hmm.
by AOEing down the pack, and you can still do the limit break against the boss if there's enough time to build it up again.
Because in 14 at least, trash pulls take the most time in the dungeon. The boss fights
Right.
get breezed through. It's the getting through the trash that's the long part.
Right. They're basically like bosses are kind of more like mechanics check. And it's not necessarily even that complex of a mechanic. So
Depending on what dungeon, like what
right,
tier
right,
dungeon you're running.
right, right,
But so the only other thing about the trust is that they're less efficient than players. So if you're going to run a dungeon with players, it's going to take you about 20 or 30% longer.
right. If you're doing
Uh,
it, if you trusts are going to take 20 to 30% longer rather than compared to.
yeah, I actually have some notes about trust that I should be reading.
Yes, you say
Um,
here that traditional dungeons will take 15 to 20 minutes,
yeah.
whereas trust will be about 30 minutes. So
Um,
look, it's going to be less efficient. Basically, if you're looking to, if you're looking for, more kind of a single player experience, is a great thing. If you're looking to level up your, all your other, non-main classes, this is probably not the way you're going to do it. You're probably still going to run dungeons with players, unless you just really don't. I think like kind of going back to the idea of Tankxiety, like this is a good way to do like allow people to kind
learn
of
the
get their
mechanics.
yeah, or get their feet wet with tanking
Mm-hmm.
specifically, because the other NPCs will probably not insult your mother for having you. They, if you're not doing a perfect job of tanking.
Unless you piss off Alice A.
Oh
We all know
yeah,
she's a Spitfire.
right.
That boy just
Um,
ain't buoyant.
but but yeah, and to like give people like a little bit of a if they're leveling up a tank class and they have that anxiety, this might be something that kind of gives them the advantage. I guess like stepping back to the anxiety issue again, like it's kind of interesting because like when I first started playing Final Fantasy 14, I didn't play the tank classes very much.
Mm-hmm. Same.
Um, but I became a tank main, I would say, in late Heaven's Ward, because there's a new dungeon that came out, Zephatal, which is also happens
Mm.
to be like visually one of my favorite dungeons.
Oh, it's a
Um,
pretty dungeon, yeah.
it's a very pretty dungeon, but it was like I was with my free company at the time, which is basically Final Fantasy 14's equivalent of guilds, and they were like, "Oh, we want to run this dungeon, but we don't have a tank. Hey, you play tank? Do you want to tank it?" And it was like one of the first dungeons I did blind, which I'd done dungeons before, but like it's generally like, okay, I'm gonna run as DPS first. I'm gonna watch what happens, know the pulls and all this stuff. And so this is one of the first dungeons I ran blind, and I did great at it. And like that was kind of like the first thing. That was my first step towards kind of overcoming any potential anxiety I had, was that, oh, I know I have the skill set to go into a dungeon blind, and now like I'll do dungeons blind all the time. Um, and so I'm thinking like from the trust system might be the same thing, where instead of like going in with a group of trusted FC mates that are very supportive and whatnot, you can basically go in with NPCs that like aren't going to insult your parentage if you make a couple mistakes, and they basically potentially learn more of how how to tank a dungeon before you kind of get in front of a live audience of like I
Yeah,
said, the professional football players.
to my understanding, you will be able to run like the new roulette dungeons first
Mm,
with trust if you want to.
mm,
The developers comments in it were Yoshi P specifically said, I'd encourage you to run with players first and then use the trust as your alternate job leveling process.
mm.
Like that was his like final comment about it, which I always find it really interesting when he makes comments like that.
Right, right. Because that seems like almost kind of the exactly opposite of what most people would probably want to do, where they would want to do the trust system, get to know the dungeon, understand how to where to pull, what to do,
Mm.
and then go do it with a group. When you have some confidence.
Yeah, I thought it was yeah, I thought the same thing, but I I kind of I think I kind of understand where he's coming from, where he's just like, well, that it's the fastest run, it's the fast way to run through it to get to the next part of the MSQ.
Mm, mm.
Maybe his thought process was, it helps, get people through queues faster.
Right, right.
Like I just thought it was a really interesting comment from him.
Yeah, I guess that's like backing up too. That's like another really interesting thing talking about tanking in the Final Fantasy games, or in MMOs in general, because basically, generally you have uh, generally you have kind of like in Final Fantasy, like the tank queues are the fastest, because tank is one of the least popular um, roles to play, and so that's one of the things that kind of draws people into tanking. I think is that they want to try, they want faster queue times,
It's the
but then
demand, yeah.
yeah, but then the flip side of that, of course, is that then you know but then there's kind of all of a sudden people feel all this pressure trying to go in a tank, especially if they have an alternate kind of goal in mind. Yeah, and so basically, if you have people trying to tank, or if the tanks all go do trust, then that's going to just make the queue times for everybody else feel worse.
Hmm. Yeah. Um. Actually, it's kind of interesting. As of late, I've been getting a lot of instant queues on my healer, which is uh, more uncommon than you'd think.
Right, right. I notice that tends to kind of go in waves. I think it'll be really interesting to see what happens with Shadowbringers because they're introducing two new classes, a tank and a DPS. There's no new healer.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm thinking like like healer might be the secret sauce to get into like the fast queues in Shadowbringers dungeons.
Yeah, I'm gonna be leveling Dancer first to at least 70.
I'm probably gonna be doing warrior first just to get tasty tank queues.
Get
I
more
might,
fell cleaves.
yeah. I mean, playing warrior is just fun. I guess we'll see what happens with the mechanics changes and what. I mean, I guess
Yeah.
the alternate might be I might do white mage just to if tank queues aren't instant because we have a ton of gunbreakers.
Well, I mean, if you start day one, you'll have an advantage because
But
the gunbreakers will still be getting caught up.
yeah. I tend to go really slow though. So I mean, like the worst, my night mercenary, I guess, is like I get that start and basically kind of plod along, and then all of a sudden other people jump in and and then suddenly I'm fighting with 10 billion gun breakers trying to queue for the same dungeon later because they rush through stuff.
I mean, I don't remember tank queues being bad in Heaven's Word.
Well, they are just one of each rank in Heaven's Ward. They're just a DPS,
True.
a healer, and a tank. So since there's not going to be any new healer to basically kind of like and the new healer was Astrologian, which pretty much people kind of thought sucked at it initially, but then they made a couple changes and then suddenly it became the meta darling. So
And it never stopped.
right. So yeah, yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens. But anyway, back to trust. Sorry, a little bit of a side here.
Digression.
Yeah. The thing I kind of wonder about too is if they're going to do that collectability aspect of it, um, because like that. I mean, for me personally, like I have 260 minions on my main character on Final Fantasy 14. And
Right.
arguably, I started doing that because I wanted, I thought Verminion was going to be a lot more fun than it turned out to be. Just I think like a lot of other people. And so, but like then I got the bug, and then I'm like, I'm going to keep on collecting these things. And I kept on, getting more and more minions. Even though, like, personally, like that character only uses about 3 or 4 different types of minions. I've
Right.
got 260 of them that I could use. Like, like I could see the same thing happening with the trust. Like, if I start having to do things in order to unlock them, it's like I want to run dungeons with my friends, not with these NPCs. But
I want to play
if I
dress
gotta do
up
this,
with.
it didn't even dress up like just like I could if I wanted to go run this dungeon with these super rare pre Binding Calls of Bahamut, Alice, and
Yeah, I
you
don't think we're
know,
gonna get that
undead
though.
Minfilia.
Oh my god, undead Philly.
I'm sorry, spoiler alert.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, like that was my prediction at first that it was gonna
Right.
be like a collectathon thing, but that got squashed in some Q&A.
Why I could still see them going that direction though. I mean, like that
Um
might not be their intention initially. Definitely see them
right.
potentially go in that direction because like that's like easy content. Like you kind of see this with a lot of the other collectible stuff, like orchestra and rolls and minions and mounts and whatnot. They put the reward at the end of this thing that you may not do normally, and then like then everybody goes and does that because they want the minion or the reward or
Right.
the glamour or whatever.
The argument that I heard about because basically Yoshi's response was the trust that you get through the MSQ is the only trust you're gonna get. Like
Mm,
be at least for Shadowbringers, I think was the qualifier, because the trusts are so individually heavily scripted that it would cost they would have to take away from something else to add more trusts in later. Like we have this conversation a lot. Is
right.
that I don't know the like the details of what he's talking about there, but because like all the trusts have their own personality scripts and behavior
Well,
scripts and everything like that,
and they might even have like and
and
the
voice
they
acting.
probably have their own behaviors. The other thing too is like if there's banter between the characters, like as you add more trust, then it's going to become exponentially harder for there's going to be an exponential explosion of how much dialogue you have to write in order for every pair of characters or whatever
Hmm.
to have their own unique
And
interactions.
those interactions are voice acted.
Oh,
That's the
okay,
other thing.
yeah.
So
But still, I could see them doing like as a developer, I could see them doing like kind of like the MSQ type trust, and then basically like doing a secondary type of trust. Because like the other thing too, kind of like talking about them doing kind of trial runs for stuff before they do it. There was the squad, the Grand Company squads,
true.
and they like that was another thing where they said, oh we're only gonna do certain dungeons. Because like we have to kind of set them up special for the squads,
Yeah,
but they've kept on adding more and more dungeons, and and it's super like there's no real interaction with the characters, so they can add more characters easy. They could have added more characters. I don't think they have
they
since the
haven't.
initial, but I
It's
don't think the squads running dungeons with squads is kind of painful. Um,
oh, I just try to run a Wanderer's Palace with my oh my god, it was awful.
right. Well, I think part of the problem is like like there's an assumption that you kind of had to grind through stuff in order to because they had these dispositions
Right,
and
right.
they could go up to the level 5 for the dispositions and like and what disposition they advanced was random, so you could basically get like a healer that basically had like I'm going to do more damage disposition rather than more healing, and it's like no. Or you could get a tank that was like I'm going to do more damage, like no, I want you to have the defensive stats or whatnot. So like I did a lot of grinding on one of my characters, like this alt character I was just kind of working up. I still need to kind of do all that stuff with my main character, but like that's just so tedious.
It's awful. It's
But
just
yeah, like
awful.
Wander's Palace Hard was like, oh yeah, like that first boss, because he throws the spear. Like he basically there's a mechanic where he throws spears and it basically does, you know, AOE damage to everybody.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it is you gotta think of it like as a dot. It puts a dot on everybody, so you have to go kill it. But your your team members are idiots and will not go and basically fight the thing.
You have to manually command them too.
Right. And even if you do, like some of them sharpest sticks in the bundle, and they don't do that, and yeah, toward the end, and like when you have to like when you're doing the thing, you have to go click on the thing and then click on the command to go do that. Like that you introduce a little bit of inefficiency. So like some of the stuff is like a little bit of a DPS check, and yeah, no, I hated that. You know,
My
I was playing a
my hmm.
I was playing a DPS for that too. So like I was able to to mow these things down faster as opposed to, like if I played a tank or whatnot. But
The
it's just
my most frustrating run, I think, was besides Wander's Palace normal mode, was Brave Fox normal, because
mm,
like because uh th- in the second room of Brave Fox there's all those all optional goblin spawns that you can
mm,
kill.
mm.
Well, there's one on an overlook that's above the boss
Oh, right.
arena. And if you go to engage the boss, all your trust will turn around and leave the arena to go fight that goblin instead.
Right. Or the things attacking the goblin. Yeah.
It's just like, okay, I'm attacking. Wait, where are you guys?
Guys.
Guys?
Mhm. Right. The one saving grace you have on this though is like the mechanics always happen to your character in these
Yeah,
things.
it's predictable.
Right. So it's a lot more predictable because like like the last boss in Brave Fox Normal is this dragon that they'll basically spit at a person and it'll put down a pool that damages everybody and heals the dragon. And so your general strategy, you have to kind of like slowly, the usual strategy is basically like the tank will slowly kind of drag the dragon around the outside. Everybody kind of stands in ways that basically allows that to happen. And occasionally you get like, but the dragon will pick a random person to spit at. Doesn't give much warning, and sometimes you get really bad placement of the acid pools. But because that always happens to your character in that fight when you're with your squad. Yeah, like, generally the thing you can do is like, okay, you guys fight over there, and it should be about the time, so I'm gonna go over here. Yep, spit and back.
Except for when you're the tank.
Yeah, Well, I mean, if you're the tank, then you can drag it. So.
Yeah, but then you have to drag it.
Right.
That's the
I
issue.
mean, right. But yeah, and like so anyway, yeah, like like, some of the stuff they've tried to do to kind of make the single player stuff, make stuff a little more single player has been kind of mixed response. Like I said, like dungeons are my favorite part of the thing, and I kind of loathe the the squad system that we've just been talking about, just because like it's so soulless. It feels like just that much more of a grind. The people are idiots. It
It's
feels
like
like
playing with other players.
it's worse than playing with other players. I mean, like,
Well, you said they're
it,
idiots, so.
I mean, like, that's the funny thing is like in Final Fantasy 14, I've never had that bad of an experience really.
You've never
I think,
played on Primal.
well, okay, that's fair, but
They're
um,
awful on Primal.
no, I mean, it could be, but like, well, I think the other thing too is like I mostly play a tank and I'm a really good tank, so you
Challenge
know.
accepted.
I mean, listen, you can rescue me into the bad, and in general, if somebody's not acting malicious, like like the biggest problem you run into with a lot of people though is like the idea of um, people just kind of being incompetent.
Hi.
Well, you're malicious. This is different. Like I said, you'll rescue me into the bad. The rescue is a healer spell. It allows you to pull someone to your location. I think we had a little example of that when we did the player types where
I can pull it up if you want for a.
no, I mean if you want, but yeah, I don't think it's really necessary. But yeah, we can pull somebody into a bad situation, run away, they get stuck in the bad, or or the floor crumbles out from under them. Um, and so, but like but just in general, I've had very few poor experiences. Like in the 5 years I've played, like I think I've only really had like one bad experience, is where we
Yeah,
had
it
this like really
sucks.
obnoxious tank that basically was just not basically was just kind of terrible and was like I'm not like not even like uh uh um negligent about it, but it was actually like it felt like they were like intentionally malicious and like really just kind of because you get those people that don't like don't talk to you. You're like, hey, put on your tank stance. They don't say anything. They don't do anything. You're like, maybe they don't speak English, but like this guy was just basically just super obnoxious. And yeah, as soon as I got out, I actually blacklisted him just to make sure I would never get him again. Because I'm like, nope, not interested in dealing with your ass ever again. But that's like once in 5 years. I think other people kind of have bad experiences, but like to put not too charitably, I think part of that's kind of a bit of a reflection on them, where if they're not quite up to snuff, um, it can be harder for them.
The only time I've ever. No, it's not the only time. The most memorable time I had a malicious party member that wasn't me.
Mm-hmm.
I was running Keeper of the Lake
Mm-hmm.
back when I was relevant.
Mm-hmm.
And I just had this tank that was just an asshole. And he was a pre-made with the DPS, and they kept voting to kick the the not them DPS.
Because they thought they were bad and holding them back or something like that, or
No, they like
they just for shits and giggles, huh?
something like that. Yeah, and then like they and I felt like they intentionally wiped on a boss, and but I just kept the other DPS alive because I'm just like,
Mm.
fuck you, because the
Right,
tank like
right,
stood in the fire basically,
right.
and I'm just like, no, we'll just do this with the DPS, whatever. And they started calling me a troll and a toxic player, and they were gonna report me and blah blah blah, and then we got a new DPS in because the first one left because I guess they were harassing them.
Mm.
and then they started voting to kick the new DPS out, and I'm just like, what is wrong with you?
Right, right. They
And
sound
then
like just
and then
obnoxious people.
once the third DPS came in, because that second DPS was just like, I'm out. They
Right.
started telling the third DPS that I was trolling everyone and I was the toxic person, and
Wow.
I was just like, what is wrong with you?
Right, right.
And I was
Oh,
almost in tears by the end of that run. It was awful.
no. I mean, yeah, like like if you get malicious people like that, it can be just really. I mean, and the problem, of course, with Final Fantasy 14 is that if you leave a full group, um, if you leave a full group, basically you take a penalty where you can't queue again for 30 minutes. Which if you're a DPS and you already spent 30 minutes in queue trying to get into the dungeon, um, that can be kind of like really kind of super frustrating to basically have to go out, wait a half hour, then wait another 30 minutes in queue to basically queue. Generally, like as a tank or healer, kind of one of the advantages you have is like, yeah, sure, maybe you have to take that half hour problem, that half hour penalty, but once that's over, you're going to get into another dungeon pretty quickly,
Mm-hmm.
if not immediately. So, um, yeah, no, like I said, like most of the times when you start talking about like kind of bad groups, most people talk about the idea of kind of like just incompetent people. But yeah, I think when you start talking about like intentionally malicious, I've only kind of like I've never had anything quite as bad as what you were describing there. That's kind of like hair raising, but the number of people I've had like where I felt like they were so incompetent to the point it was like destroying any kind of shred of fun I could have. Like I said, there's only really one person. I don't even remember precisely what they did. I just remember like I got pissed off enough about it to specifically blacklist them to make sure I never got that person again.
I'm trying to think of like the most incompetent run I've had. I think I was running with you.
Oh,
No, it wasn't you
listen
though.
to this.
No, remember that Arm Veil run we were doing? And we had like two new DPS and I was struggling to heal, and I was like yell I think I'd been up for like 24 hours, so I was like
Right.
dead brained, and I was yelling at them to do Mage's Ballad, and they're like, I don't understand.
Oh, right, right. Oh, I remember that one. Because yeah, because Arm Veil's a pretty, can be pretty healer intensive to begin with.
And the DPS was bad, and it took
Right.
forever. And so like I was burning through my MP just trying to keep you going,
Right.
and I kept so bards had used to have a spell called Mage. I mean, they still have it, but it was
It
called
does something
Mage's
different now.
Ballad, and it was
That's right.
um
You're using the wrong name. You're using the old name instead of
yeah, yeah,
because
uh,
now it's called Refresh, like what it is in 14 and 11. I mean,
yeah,
but yeah, it
yeah.
used to be Mage's Ballad. Used to be the thing that refreshed, spell points. Yeah.
And I'm like, use Mage's Ballad, and they're like, I don't understand, and I'm just like, just use it, use the thing, do the thing.
Right. Right. Because you were under a lot of stress.
I was under a lot of stress. I was exhausted because I think I've been up all day.
Right.
And
Right.
it was like the last thing I needed to do for the day, and then I was gonna pass out, and then like this person just did. I think they were new to the game, and I felt really bad afterwards.
Right.
But it was just like, just learn your class, learn know what you can do, please, for the love of
Right.
God.
Right. Right.
And I think that's one of the things that 14 is does the worst is class learning.
Right.
It really does not teach you how to play your class.
Well, I mean, again, it's kind of like one going back to kind of solo versus group content. Because like World of Warcraft, I kind of had that too. The not very polite, uh, you know, uh, huntards, which were basically hunters were basically a class that was like really great at soloing. They had a pet and they had range damage and they did like really great. They were like a really powerful class for soloing. But then you would get these people that would basically had like just run through content solo and then they got to group content and they had no idea how to play in a group
Everything
because
is
they
a
had
hunter weapon.
right, yeah, I know that's the other thing too is yeah, everything is a hunter basically just kind of grab whatever they
Which
would basically just grab whatever weapons they could.
I actually raided with a Malay survival hunter in Wrath of the Lich King.
Oh yeah.
And they did really good damage. And we just,
Mm.
I mean, they weren't part of our A group. We had a marksmanship hunter for that.
Mm.
But we'd bring them in for the 25-man runs, and they'd actually be in like the top 5 DPS for the 25-man route. And we're just like, good for you. Like you
Right.
I mean, you did you became the meme.
Right.
But now survival hunters actually are a Malay hunter in WoW. Like
Right.
that's what the spec is actually designed for now.
Right. Yeah, but I mean, the point being though, that's like, wow, having that very focused single player experience, then kind of like threw people into okay, now you have to do group stuff, and then it became like they didn't know how to do it because like like a big thing of course for a lot of people is like they would just let their pet go, and like in that open world that's fine, like maybe your pet might pull something or whatever
Oh,
that you didn't
aggro
expect
mode.
when up. Yeah. But like in a dungeon, that shit would wipe groups, and it was just super frustrating.
Mhm. Um yeah, WoW is better about that now. There's actually a a thing you can do when you make a character. You can put them into like preview mode,
Mm-hmm.
and basically it'll make the character and it'll put it on an airship and basically give you target dummies, and it'll give you a tutorial on the class and each spec and like what your
Mm.
spells do and how to rotate your abilities, and it'll give you a preview on like the talents available and let you experiment and figure out what spec you like of it, if you like it, if you don't like it, and then you
Right.
can leave and just delete the character if you don't like it, or you can move on and introduce it into the world. But
Right.
it gives you a top level preview of the
Right.
class. So literally no one ever has an excuse to not know their character.
Well, I mean, if we want to talk about things like that, we can start talking about the novices hall in Final Fantasy 14. That is the appropriate response.
Oh yes, we're gonna teach you things that never get applied to anything.
Or teach you things that even
Like, I'm screwed right now.
because like one of the things is like the DPS. You go tank this thing so it doesn't beat on the healers. Like that's a good way to get killed.
Right. Like, when this never gets applied in actual content, what are you talking about?
Right.
Unless you're a dragoon, because apparently dragoons are the tankiest of not tanks. In
Like
theory,
kind of are though. I mean, like 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 they had the heavier
armor, yeah.
male armor, so like which is like slightly higher. But I mean, like like the reality of it is that like the values were basically so low that there's no
I mean, it matters ever so slightly, like in lower levels when armor stats have more value to them,
right. But I mean,
but
like
that dies off really fast.
right, and like I said, like at higher levels I tanked for 30 seconds as a black mage. At lower levels I can tank. There was one time I was running a low level dungeon and I basically like the tank died and I'm like I'm the black mage, I got aggro, and basically just ran around using my instant cast spell. It went really fucking slowly, but basically
Yeah, I remember in running normal Titan tanking as a healer
right.
because the tank got knocked off the ledge. I was like, okay, I'm gonna white mage tank.
Right.
Like, armor doesn't count for anything in the game. Um, uh, I, I mean, like the novice hall though is, I mean, it is relevant because that's like single player, single solo content tutorial versus trial by fire and like Stastasha, because you unlock both
Yeah,
of them at the same time.
the the problem is though is like it's kind of like it's a little tone deaf and it really doesn't give you a very good. I mean, it gives you kind of the basic mechanics. It gives you the kind of like the letter of how things work, but not the spirit.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the only reason to run novice hall is to get the gear and the ring.
That's the worst part though. Is like when there's somebody who's geared up a couple of alts. It's like uh, yeah, it's just sitting through that shit. It's just so terrible.
Oh yeah, it's hi. I've done it 5 times.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
awful. But you got to get that
yeah.
ring. Like
You need to get the ring, and like the gear is like really good for level 15. Like I usually wear that gear until about level 30.
yeah, yeah.
Which
Like I did stat comparisons on it, and it is level 30 gear.
yeah,
Like there's no reason to wear the dungeon gear. Like just stat wise, it
right,
doesn't compare.
right.
And yeah.
So anyway, I think we're kind of like we got through got
Most
through our
of it.
notes. I mean, we had some other stuff, but I think we kind of covered a lot of that stuff and a lot of the other stuff we were talking about. So
Mm-hmm.
um, but did anybody have any kind of questions, comments, thoughts?
Stories, anything you want.
Yeah.
While the Twitch gets caught up, I'm gonna check to see who's online. I don't know who I'm gonna raid.
Uh,
Whoever's
oh, Syrians.
whoever's
Syrians on.
online. Nah, I don't think we'll raid Surian. No. Why would we do that?
Tradition.
I wish I got like Twitch achievements. Actually, I think I get Twitch achievements for raiding,
Yeah.
but I don't think I get it for raiding like the same person over and over again. Cause why would I do that? And I forgot to mention the sponsored messages at the beginning. Oops.
Oh well. Are they working again?
Uh, I did a test one earlier and it worked. I can see it. The website's up. That was really weird too. I forgot about that actually. Yeah, website's up. Actually, what did Vela send me on the last stream?
Oh.
Uh, don't. Okay, don't go to Kugane Tower. You may end up a smashed potato. Oh, esports. It's a real sport, Dad. Oh, apparently they're having an issue with loots. There's a warning that the dashboard earnings may not be correct. All
Oh.
transactions are being recorded. We're working on a fix for it for the display error. That's interesting. Yeah, I think it was a good. We had a good talk here.
Yeah.
Okay, Dejaro says we have a running joke about Korean tiger moms and aspiring esports players. I don't get it. Young man, you stop that homework at once and go play StarCraft.
Nice.
Uh, yeah, I've tried to explain like to non gamers like how big StarCraft is in Korea, and
Mm.
like I've never been able to like get an explanation that portrays it. Like the best I've ever been able to explain is like it's like the NFL for Korea.
Kinda.
Like
it's.
that's the only comparison I can find that like explains it.
Hmm.
But I think interest in StarCraft's died off recently too.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the things that they're kind of like. We were talking a little bit meta level about the shine of Blizzard Star coming off. I think that's one of the aspects of it is like yeah, they really haven't been able. Like they were kind of hoping Overwatch would be kind of like the successor, but I don't think it's quite taken off as much as I had hoped.
Right. Um I mean it Overwatch is big in the states, but I don't think it took off in Korea as much.
Right.
Um yeah, esports is hard. Life is
Mm-hmm.
hard. They tuned Overwatch specifically to be an esports game at the cost of casual playability. I mean, yeah, it's hard to just play casually. It's not. I mean, I have Overwatch. I've played Overwatch. I'm not a giant Overwatch fan personally. Maybe I'll stream it and you can watch me rage.
Oh my.
I like Team. I haven't played Team Fortress 2 in like 10 years. I loved it. I loved playing a pyro, and just setting things on fire, and then
Pyro is my favorite as well. Maybe this is why we get along so well.
cause I had the build that if you set things on fire, your fire axe would do like quadruple damage or whatever like that.
Mm.
So I'd literally just shoot people with the flare gun and then chase after them with an axe, like a maniac. It was fun. The other things I liked doing was I had a flamethrower that like had half cost to the air blow secondary fire.
Right.
So I'd literally just run around knocking people off cliffs
Mhm.
without a care. I didn't care. Or like reflecting projectiles back at people.
Right. Right.
I once played volleyball with a rocket and another pyro. It was the two fortresses map, and we are both on top of our I haven't played in like 10 years, Jara. So no, probably not.
Oh.
We just kept ping ponging the rocket between the two bases for like 2 minutes straight, just going back nonstop. It was so friggin' funny until some random enemy ran up at me. I'm like, here, catch. It was fun. Uh, okay. I think we're good.
Yeah. Good podcast.
It was a good podcast. I had fun. Oh, mute that. Nobody noticed that. Shut up. I opened up my own Twitch page and
Oh.
my sound was on.
I didn't hear anything, but
Good. Oh, I need to play with that. The pyro sees world of puppies and rainbows, and the flamethrower shoots Bibles.
bubbles.
Bubbles.
Yeah. Oh. Okay. I remember that. Yeah. Yeah. They had this little
Oh,
thing, basically like.
I saw the video for that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll have to go check that out. Well, actually, I'd be able to play with really good frame rate now.
Yeah.
Cause, yeah, that was a thing. Yeah, I'll have to check that out sometime. Thanks for hanging out. It's been fun. Uh, we will be doing another podcast Tuesday. I'm not sure if it's going to be a game list or not because these kind of take a little more time for us to do prep work for.
Right. Right. I try to give you a lot more content, since we're not kind of like interrupting every 5 seconds to talk about the game.
That
So.
sweet headshot that I just got. Because it's
Mhm.
the only one I'll ever see. Um, so on personal streaming news, I will probably be streaming on the when is it? When is early? 28th.
I think
I
so.
think it's the 28th. The new expansion comes out. The early access for the new expansion comes out on the 28th, I think it is. And I'll be streaming that, or I'll be trying to stream that. I can't promise my stream quality because lots of lag and people and quality issues, and we'll see. We'll see if I can pull that off. But I hope I can stream that. And then of course we'll have another podcast next Tuesday, which is before that. Yeah, the 28th is next Friday. 25th is next Tuesday. So we'll have something figured out for that. I don't think we've discussed that far ahead. Yeah.
No.
Maybe we'll talk about Shadowbringers. Ha! Some more.
Mm-hmm.
Ha ha!
Brr.
Actually, talk about expand. Have we talked about expansions? Like the practice of expansions yet?
I don't think so.
Like maybe we'll talk about that since it's kind of relevant to us.
Right,
That'd
right.
be neat. We'll talk about it. We'll figure it out. I'll let you know on the Discord. We're gonna rate a new person named Surian90. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of him.
Who is this person? Does he do interesting game?
Does he play Dark Souls?
All he's doing Monster Hunter World tonight.
Yeah, he is. So let's go hang out with him. At least say hi to him before you go off to be productive human beings and or
What is
sleep.
this? Confused.
I don't know. It's like this is my job or something. I don't know. Uh, anyways, we'll see you guys next week. I might try to doing some streaming this week. I no promises. I've been really busy with other things. So we'll see. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you next week.
Yep. Thanks, everybody.